writers, you're listening to the Kobo ReWriting Life Podcast, where we highlight an episode from our backlist that will bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. I'm your host, Tara Kremen, Director of Kobo Writing Life. Today's episode is an interview with productivity strategist and author Sagan Morrow from April 2021. The reason I picked this episode is because, well, who couldn't use some advice on being more productive in January? I know I need some. Sagan gives some strategies that authors can implement now to better manage their time and incorporate more writing into their schedule, including taking inventory of their energy levels, discovering their learning style, and removing distractions. I hope it helps make 2025 your most productive year yet. This week, we are chatting to Sagan Morrow. Sagan, thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
For sure. I am very multi-passionate. I am an author of polyamorous romantic comedy novels. I host the Indie Author Weekly podcast, and I'm also a productivity strategist for other multi-passionate creatives and solopreneurs. So I really work with them to help them save time and manage their energy really effectively and make progress in all of their big ideas and goals.
So I guess our next question would be like, what are some strategies authors could do to be more productive, or what kind of approaches do you think they should do when they think about productivity?
Well, I think the big thing is really understanding, what is it that you want from your project, right? And looking at how does this fit into everything else that I have going on? I know, like, whenever I'm writing a book, I always have a lot of other things that I'm doing. I'm teaching courses online, doing freelance writing projects for my own clients and that kind of thing. So whenever I'm writing a new book, it's always about figuring out, okay, what is the actual end goal that I want it published by? What are all of the steps that need to be done prior to that in terms of outlining the book and writing it and going through the editing process and all of that? And really crafting those timelines and creating a solid plan around all of that. And also taking into consideration things like, what are my energy levels like at different times of day or different days of the week, and factoring that in. If I have a big project that I'm working on the productivity side of things, then I might postpone working on my book for a week or two, because I know that I need all of my energy and my focus and sort of brain power really directed to this other project, right? So making sure that we're being really cognizant of where we are spending all of our time and planning ahead as much as possible can make such a big difference.
Is that what a productivity strategist is? Like, that you're just basically strategizing the productivity and trying to maximize output, I assume. But that's really interesting. I'm just kind of curious about what it is and maybe how you got into this field.
Yeah. So a productivity strategist basically helps people figure out an action plan, right? And I really like to work with people when it comes to productivity based on their personality. So really figuring out, okay, what is your learning style? How do you like to organize things? How can we make sure that your entire business is set up to really reflect what you want from your personal life or what your values are, all of that kind of stuff. I started as a freelancer about 10 or 12 years ago. And at that point, I didn't know anything about productivity. I was like constantly just rushing around, putting out fires and just like trying to get things done and like barely meeting deadlines and all of that. And it really was at this point where I wanted to do so many different things in my business. Like, I wanted to write books. I'd always wanted to do that. I just had so many big ideas and creative projects that I wanted to really play with and have fun with, that it got to the point where I thought, I need to figure out how to manage myself effectively. If I want to be able to do it all, then I need to figure out really great strategies to empower me to really do that. So that's how I got really interested in productivity and figuring out, how can I best get more done without burning out, right? And still have the energy to enjoy hobbies or start new projects or start, side hustles within my own business, right? Really experiment with a lot of things. And so the productivity side of things came out of that. And so I began teaching about business and working from home effectively quite a few years back. I got a lot of questions from other freelancers about how I was doing it. And that's actually when I wrote my first book, The Business of Writing and Editing. And people really loved the book, but they were also like, I want more. So that's when I started creating courses and teaching them about it. And it was in the last couple of years that I really pivoted and began teaching primarily about productivity and time management for other creatives, for other solopreneurs. Really, yeah, primarily that as my course business.
Nice. That sounds like something that independent authors could definitely benefit from, having to wear many hats and doing many things and juggling deadlines. Without giving away all of your secrets, but is there something that our authors could take away from, like, a top tip for productivity?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is, truly understanding what are your energy levels, right? So really looking at what times of day do I have that creativity and energy to work on my book, and to really think about, how can I maybe restructure my entire schedule to accommodate for this? I think, too often we assume that we need to be working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. But the truth is that a lot of us, our brains don't actually work that way, right? We're not going to necessarily do our best work. And then we might think, oh, okay, I need to be a morning person because the most productive people are morning people. But that's also not the case, right? We can actually be really productive at any time of day. It's really about tuning into what works really well for us. So I don't prescribe to any one particular productivity method, right? I don't prescribe to the Pomodoro technique or anything like that. Those are all really good strategies, really good techniques. But much more importantly, it's about identifying what is my learning style, what is my productivity style, and how can I apply that to everything I do? How can I restructure things and maybe think outside the box to really make my own rules? Right? Getting beyond what our society is sort of structured for us as this is the schedule that you need to follow. Instead, really looking at, okay, what if I did something different? Because there is no one right way, right? There's so many different ways that we can really do things, which is really why, in my Productivity Powerhouse program, one of the very first things that my clients do is they identify their learning style and they go through a productivity assessment so that they can really start everything out from there.
I don't know if this is a comment or a question, but I'm curious. So when you've discovered your productivity style, did that kind of influence your writing time? Like you've now discovered I only write certain times of day, or I only write certain times a week, or like how was that incorporated into your writing schedule?
Ooh, that's a good question. I find that it really depends on an ongoing basis, especially with the pandemic, right? That's really thrown everything off. All of us are kind of scattered and everything. So I find that it's really, really important to adapt and be flexible for me, right? For my writing style, it's very much about, okay, here's my plan that I have in place. Here are my timelines. Here's when I'm going to write. And then making sure that, I'm checking in with myself. And if my creative and energy levels are much lower on that day that I was planning on writing, then it's about figuring out, okay, how am I going to boost my energy to actually make this happen? Or how can I clear off some things from my desk or out of my inbox or whatever it happens to be so that I'm not getting distracted by those things? Because that's such a big part of it, right? When we're writing books, we really want to ensure that we are really well focused on it and that we're putting our all into it. And I think that a lot of the times what ends up happening, especially for indie authors who are doing this on the side while they're maybe running a whole other business or they're working at a 9-to-5 job, it becomes a real problem where we feel like we don't have that sort of concentrated time to do it, right? There's so many other things going on. So the more that we can eliminate those distractions, the more that we can really focus and work on it without all of that stuff filling up our heads or filling up our office space.
Definitely. I feel like it's been drilled into us that we work. I don't know, Tara, maybe this is just me, but 9 to 5, if you're not productive during those hours, then you're not doing your job. But I always find particularly when I was a student, I would do work at 9 p.m. and that's when I was the most efficient.
Well, definitely with the pandemic and us having the flexibility working at home, I've definitely found that I'm oh, I just really enjoy going for a walk during the day. And then if I'm working a little bit extra in the evening, that tends to be how my routine has shifted a little bit. So yeah, I could definitely see how if you are working from home all the time, you would kind of, after a while, you just figure out your own flow time.
Yeah. And I find paying attention to it, right, is such a big piece to really look at, okay, why am I dragging my feet with this? Why am I procrastinating on doing this? Why am I struggling to stay focused? What's really going on here? And taking that sort of step back to figure that out can make such a huge difference to our productivity. Because once we know what's going on and the reason why we're having trouble staying focused or why we're procrastinating or whatever it happens to be, once we know the why, then we can actually deal with the how. Then we can figure out, okay, now I can actually tackle this deeper issue that I'm facing, and start moving forward from there.
Nice. So you've talked about kind of productivity and solopreneurs. And I know we often hear the phrase authorpreneurs as well. And I'm just wondering if you could chat a little bit about or even if it is important for authors to view themselves as business owners and having that sort of solopreneur mindset.
Yeah, I definitely find that if we aren't coming at our author career from that sort of mindset, right, from that sort of business approach, that authorpreneur mentality, what ends up happening is we aren't taking our books as seriously and we aren't as committed to the process, right? So it makes such a huge difference when we can really look at, all right, this is going to be an important part of my life, right? Of my business. And I'm going to dedicate that time, set aside that time for it. And, when it comes to being multi-passionate, really embracing all of this, right? Really embracing the fact that we have a lot of different interests. We're human beings. We don't need to force ourselves into a particular box or into one particular niche. And when we can sort of embrace that about ourselves, the fact that we have so many different things going on in our lives, that almost can give us the permission to then spend more time working on our books, because then we're not feeling like it's, I'm not supposed to be doing that because I have these 5 other things to do, right? It's much more about, well, actually this writing my books feeds me. It fuels me. Like that creative process is something that I absolutely love. And so connecting back to that joy of it can end up actually energizing us in other areas as well, which is kind of cool. It all connects together.
Just saying, when it feeds you, and it literally feeds you as well, if this is your business.
Yeah. And I think it can be really difficult when we're writing books to figure out ways to actually make money with it, right? That can be really tough. But looking at it as, especially in the early days, as kind of experiments and having fun with it, and really looking at, okay, I'm going to try this method over here. What worked? What didn't work? Why do I think that worked? Why do I think that this didn't work? How do I want to pivot things? What are some fresh, creative, new ideas that I can come to this with? I find that with a lot of authors, we tend to be creative people. We don't like to do the marketing side of things, right? We're not as interested in selling our books. We just want to write books. But when we can kind of flip that on its head and really look at marketing our books as part of the creative process, right? It's another avenue. It's another vehicle for being creative. That can be a really nice way to sort of look at, okay, this is actually more fun for me, and I want to spend time doing this, which can then, of course, actually improve book sales and help us to start making more money with it.
I'm curious, looking back, what do you think was the best thing that you did for your business? Could be like writing side, business side, whatever you...
Yeah. Ooh. I would definitely say the strategizing of things, being really clear and planning ahead, because this was one of my big issues early on with my business, right? It was very much day to day, just trying to get things done. And I wasn't really looking at, am I staying on track with what I want? And what do I even want? Right? I hadn't really gone through all of that. I sort of fell into freelancing, and I hadn't really actively made that choice. So by, really focusing a lot on the business planning, on the strategizing, on really getting in deep to what do I truly want? How do all of the different pieces of my business and my life fit together and support one another? And how can I make sure that I'm staying on track with all of these pieces? That has made such a huge difference. And it allows me to have that fun with experimenting with books, right? And to, start the podcast and to do all of these other pieces, because I have a strategy in place and I know where my business is going. So I can really play with other elements of my the main core of my business, which is very powerful. Yeah. And, so many people do just kind of fall into their professional life, whatever it may be, without really actively making that choice, without really figuring out what do I want and how am I going to get there. And so when we do take that step back and we really approach it from that sort of productive, right, productivity strategy kind of lens, that's really, really makes a difference.
I think that's really important, especially you were saying about just taking the time with your business plan. And it's something that we definitely advise authors to do, especially if it's somebody new getting into this, is to really have a plan around your release and marketing and what you're doing. And then that gives you the means of like celebrating the little wins that you get along the way. But I know that some people might be really eager, I've written my book, it's finished, I've got this wicked cover, I want to get it out there. But taking a step back and like planning on like, how are you going to do it? Like, where's your advertising? I think that's pretty key.
Yes. And I can totally relate to other authors who are very much like, okay, now I've created this, now I'm just going to put it out there and then move on to the next project. I am very much, my natural tendency is very much to do that kind of thing. But, when we really do look at, okay, what is my rush, right? Why do I feel the need to just get this out there immediately? It's really interesting because my first book that I wrote, my first novel that I wrote, I had it written and published on Kobo. Was the very first place that I launched it within 6 weeks of coming up with the idea, writing, editing, publishing it. It was a 6-week type of thing. And that was really good for me at the time because I needed to take the action and get over, imposter syndrome and all of these types of confidence issues and that kind of thing. Once I had my first book out there, then I could really be like, okay, now I can, as every single book that I write, I've now published 7 books in my Polyamorous Passions series. And each book that I write takes longer and longer. So I'm like forcing myself to really slow down. But I think, we really can sort of lean into the different ways of writing and publishing a book by sort of like viewing it as that experiment, right? By seeing, okay, what are the hurdles? Because people tend to fall on one end or the other of the trap of, only taking action or only planning, right? People talk about writing a book and they never do it, right? They put it off for years, or they come up with the idea for a book, write it and publish it, and that's it, right? Totally don't even think about a launch at all. So the more that we can kind of figure out, okay, what are my strengths and how can I capitalize on them? If I am a really big action taker, do I want to publish my first book as a novella or a novelette and then, just get it out there so I get my action orientedness out of the way and then I can slow down on the next project? And if I'm more of a planner, how can I make sure that I'm being really, really strategic with all of my big ideas so I create an action plan that really works well for me, that feels really good, right? I'm really big into like customization when it comes to all of those strategic plans.
Do you have like a 1 year or a 5 year or 10-year plan? I'm assuming you maybe do. Or do you keep it specific to shorter amounts of time?
I always have, I tend to be the kind of person who has long-term plans and then it shifts, right? A year later, 6 months later. I always have a plan in place that I'm working towards, and then I'm pivoting it as needed. One of the things that I really love to teach my clients is doing weekly audits. So it's where you're sort of checking in with yourself on a very routine basis with your business plan, so that you can make tweaks and adjustments on an ongoing basis that aren't gigantic, huge changes to your business. Instead, it's really about making those sort of smaller pivots so you don't go too far in one direction and realize, oh, I actually didn't want to go this way. And now I'm 3 years down the line. So that's something that I do teach. I actually have a free workshop if people are interested in that at saganmorrow.com/retreat. So that's like a really good place to go if you want to sort of learn more about weekly audits. But for my own plans, definitely writing more polyamorous romantic comedies is a really big thing that I want to focus a lot more on. I really love teaching about productivity and that kind of thing, so that will not be ending anytime soon. But right now, the author side of my business is much smaller. So I'm really looking forward to expanding that a lot and really growing that. My Polyamorous Passions series, so far I have 7 books written and published. I'm working on my 8th book, which is kind of a standalone book, but there'll be 2 more in the series. And I really love seeing it as an entire world, right? That can really be grown on. So the book that I'm working on right now, Small Town Stilettos, is a sort of a spin-off from the main book series. So it features a couple of the characters in one or two of the chapters. And it's kind of fun to really be able to build on that. I really love being able to connect back with characters that I've already written. So I can definitely see myself doing a lot more of that in the future. There's a lot of side stories that I'd love to explore a lot more.
Nice. So you've talked about that you have written, your first book was on the business of writing and editing. So let's talk about kind of writing fiction for a second. And like, how did you get into this? Were you always writing fiction, or had you always wanted to write a novel?
Yeah. My parents always joke about how when I was like, I don't know, from the age that I could hold a pen, I'd be like sitting at my desk and like scribbling on bits of paper, and I couldn't like spell or anything. And they were like, what is she doing? And I was like, I'm writing books. And so like as a kid and as a teenager, I wrote full novels. Like I actually was just going through a bunch of my things, and I have these like multiple giant Rubbermaid containers full of these printouts of old books that I wrote. And it got to the point, I remember I got a degree in rhetoric from university. And when I graduated from university, I was really looking at, okay, I love the idea of being an author, but that's not realistic. I can't make money from that. Right. So I'll do other types of writing instead. So I kind of fell into freelance writing from there. And I really put the creative writing side of things on the back burner. It was really lovely to write the business of writing and editing, because that sort of gave me an opportunity to write a book. But again, it was like, well, this is a business book. So that's, it's a better choice. It's a more realistic choice. But, more recently, because I only started writing fiction, I think it was 2 years ago. More recently, I started really looking at, okay, I want to be able to express myself creatively. And, I've been saying for so many years that I want to write fiction and publish fiction, and I just haven't gotten around to it. So what's going on here? And it was right around that time that I had sort of realized that I identify as polyamorous. And it occurred to me that it had taken me this long, right? It had taken me almost 3 decades of life to figure out that I identify as polyamorous. And I realized that a big part of that is because we don't see polyamorous representation in the media, right? We don't really see it in Hollywood and that kind of thing. So I really loved this idea of writing romantic comedy novels that feature polyamory, that are very accessible, right? They're very fun and lighthearted. They're not threatening, if people have never heard of it before. So it's a really good way to share about these ideas and get the word out there and help people realize for themselves if maybe they might identify as polyamorous, or at the very least, just normalize it and make it less of a scary thing in our world. So that's how I started writing these novels.
Can you, for anyone who doesn't exactly know what polyamorous means, can you just give like a broad definition?
Yeah, sure. So polyamory is a type of ethical non-monogamy. It's really just about having romantic relationships with more than one person, and everyone knows about it and is fully consenting to it, enthusiastically consenting to it.
So when you were saying that you didn't really see the representation in books or TV shows, what kind of misconceptions did you find? And like, how do you kind of fix those misconceptions in your own work?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, the automatic response to it is, that's weird. Like that's really weird. What are you doing? And, again, it really ties back to my entire approach to my business, being multi-passionate, right? Having multiple different things that I love doing. And the entire way that I teach about productivity is very much about, it's all make your own rules. It's all about, why are you forcing yourself to do a particular technique or system or strategy? Have you really thought about adapting it to your own situation? So it's kind of funny that, for me, when it comes to polyamory, it's very much the same sort of thing, where it's approaching it from that lens of, why do we assume that monogamy is the only way to go? Why would it be better than ethical non-monogamy? So what I've really done with the books is sort of approach it from this perspective of these 3 best friends who have no idea what ethical non-monogamy is. They don't know about polyamory or anything like that. And in the first book, one of the characters realizes that she's accidentally started dating 2 men and she can't choose between them. So the book is called A Choice Between Two. And so those first 3 books really explore her entire journey of realizing that she identifies as polyamorous, coming out to both of these men that she's dating and telling them, can we do this? And them just being like, no, that's weird. And then sort of getting through that and being able to have relationships with them, coming out to, her family and coworkers about it. And then the next set of books, the next sort of trilogy within the series, because there's going to be 9 books in total. The next trilogy is about the other, like the second best friend and her experience with realizing that she wants to open up her relationship with her longtime spouse, who she's getting married to. And then the final 3 books follow the third main character, who also discovers polyamory in her own way. So it's really about breaking down all of those sorts of concepts around, polyamory is weird, right? And sort of really looking at, well, actually, no, it's just different than we've always been taught in our society. And also breaking down the whole misconception around, only one type of person can be polyamorous. So I really love approaching it with the lens of these 3 best friends, because they all have completely different characters. So we have, the one person who, Emma, in the first 3 books, she wants to date multiple people. Helen, in the second set in books 4 to 6, she's already, dating. She's already has a fiance and she's going to be getting married. She wants the kids. She wants like the white picket fence, all of that kind of thing. So we really see how you can have these different relationships coming at it from a variety of different things. The third main character, Scarlett, she doesn't want to be dating, right? She likes being all on her own. So she starts to explore things in a very different sort of lens. Yeah. So that's really the entire purpose, or a large part of these books, is really exploring how can we change our relationship styles and maybe explore what might be a better fit for us. And it's really all about that sort of self-discovery, right? So that's a really important element of them.
I found that when I've read about polyamorous relationships, it's always been in like erotica novels. And I'm curious, like, what's your perspective on like why it's kind of like you said, like, I don't know, it shouldn't always be in erotica. Like, I don't know why they are, but like, kind of what's your opinion on that?
Yes. So this is a big part of why I wanted to write romantic comedies, right? Because then it keeps it fun. It keeps it light. Oftentimes we see when we really do find polyamorous representation, it is erotica, or it tends to be fantasy or paranormal, right? Something like that, or it's dramatic. So I love the idea of doing this as a contemporary series that's actually in our world. It's not in some other magical world. And it's fun, right? It's all like the silly dating mishaps, the mistakes that people make when they're, starting out in polyamory. The way that the first character, when she realizes that she identifies as polyamorous, she kind of is like, oh, I can totally do this. Like, this will be easy. And then she realizes that she makes a bunch of mistakes. So I definitely find that was a really, really key part for me. And I think that it's really great to have polyamorous representation in all kinds of different genres. When we see it in erotica, that kind of reinforces a little bit of the sort of stereotype that, ethical non-monogamy is always about sex, when in reality, it's really about relationships and communication and, self-discovery, right? Self-empowerment, all of those types of pieces. So, I adore erotica, I'm a huge fan of it. And there's some really great erotica out there. And it's really wonderful to include polyamory in that. But we also need to see polyamory in other genres, and really having it again as that sort of realistic, contemporary, right, type of thing, rather than paranormal types of things or fantasy novels, because then it's something that readers can really see and look at, oh, I could actually do this too. It's not about, but that's like, it's a magical being, so that's why they're polyamorous, right? Like, that's not something that I could ever be. So these books have really allowed readers to start to understand the concepts better and how it might fit into their own lives or their friends' lives. And I've actually had readers, reach out to me after they've read my books, and they've told me, I just realized that I identify as polyamorous, and I opened up to my fiance or my husband. And we're doing this. Like, we have a great relationship already, but we want, I realized that this has actually always been missing. So it's been really beautiful to actually see that this is having that kind of effect.
Oh, nice. I wanted to ask you about the reader response to it, because I think in general, people are looking for underrepresented voices. And there's definitely something about, having a non-traditional, I'm using quotation marks there, relationships and spotlighting them. So is that the general feedback that you've gotten from your readers, that they're just really interested? And also, I love that you did it as a rom-com, because that just brings the lightness with it. And, if you kind of strictly being erotica, there's sort of a layer of taboo that doesn't really need to be there.
Yes, for sure. It's fun to keep it fun, right? And very light, especially because, my own experience with polyamory has been a really joyful sort of experience. It hasn't been, featured with layers of drama or anything like that. It's been joyful and fun and lighthearted. So yeah, that is definitely an important part.
Just wondering about the reader feedback has generally been positive, or do you find, because I guess readers that are reading rom-coms or romance in general kind of definitely bounce around a bunch of different things. So I wonder how readers find you. Is there BISACs, categories, keywords? That's where metadata gets really interesting with stuff like this.
Yes, that's been one of the hardest parts for me, to figure out how to effectively market my books. What are the right keywords to use? It's really tricky because when you search polyamory on a lot of databases, what you get is nonfiction, right? And all of that kind of thing about how to have a polyamorous relationship. You don't really see the fiction side of things, which is probably because there's not a lot of fiction about it. So that's definitely been a challenge. But the reader feedback that I've gotten has been very much around that sort of concept where, they're coming to me and they're saying this was really wonderful. This opened up my eyes. I hadn't thought about this before. What a fun and different way to solve a love triangle problem, right? That's been a really, really big piece of it. I have run into problems though, when it comes to launching a new book. When I'm reaching out to book bloggers to invite them to feature my book, I'll focus specifically on romance book bloggers. And I've had more than a couple who have responded to me and said, I don't agree with these types of relationships, so I'm not going to do this. And I think it's really interesting because I absolutely, I'm not going to pressure any book bloggers to do it or anything like that if they don't want to, of course. But I do find it really interesting that there are certain things that we are willing to accept in the books that we read, and there are things that we are not willing to accept. And, the amount of people who have been fine with abusive types of relationships or rape type of scenes and that kind of thing in other romance books. But then they're like, oh no, I don't want to read this because it's polyamory. That's inappropriate. It's really interesting how there's a pushback in some sense. So that's been a little bit difficult. It's definitely been a challenge that I have faced. But there's also been some incredible book bloggers who have been like, I never even thought about this before. This is cool. Yeah, let me read this. Yeah, so it's been really interesting.
I always ask about TikTok, and I don't know why it comes back to this. But Tara, before you laugh at me, there's a lot of polyamorous relationships on TikTok. And I'm wondering if that's an avenue you've thought of promoting your books, because I've found there's a lot of authors coming and using TikTok for specific things and explaining their lives. And I'm thinking maybe this fits perfectly with the kind of work that you do.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I had not thought about that before. I'm not on TikTok. I haven't added it yet to my different platforms. But that's a really interesting concept. Yeah.
It's just from a perspective of I knew these relationships existed in erotica, but then seeing it in real life and seeing people asking questions and they're answering back has been interesting. And that's why I love TikTok. It has a bunch of different people and their lives and people explaining it. Tara, don't laugh at me.
I am laughing because we just had a conversation yesterday, Sagan, about how much Steph is obsessed with TikTok. And I'm just like, oh, you're just talking about TikTok again.
I literally, okay. One day I'm going to go in depth on book talk and explain all that stuff. But anywho, moving on to the next question. So you write about writing about your own experience, but do you use sensitivity readers in your work, or how do you kind of approach the editing process?
I do not at this point. I don't yet. Up until this point, I've edited my own books, and this has really been a choice based on my own experience as an editor, right? So I have a background as a professional editor. And when I started writing my books and publishing them, I was really looking at where are my strengths and where are my weaknesses? And one of my big weaknesses is graphic design. So that was a really important piece for me to make sure that I was spending that money like on a professional cover designer. And the marketing side of things as well, is something that I've, put money into to experiment with and that kind of thing. And the editing side of things, I 100% think that everyone can benefit from an editor. Absolutely. And, in an ideal world, everyone should have an editor for sure. And at the same time, editors can be pricey, rightfully so, given the amount of work that they are doing. For me at this stage, I go through so many rounds of writing my books and rewrites and edits that it's working for me at this point to edit them for myself. I wouldn't recommend that people necessarily do that. But at the same time, I also think that that's one of the beautiful things about self-publishing is that anyone can do it, right? You can do it even if you don't have a huge budget. So and maybe this is, advice that other people wouldn't give, but, if you really want to be a writer and this is really important to you, and you frankly don't have the budget or the money to hire an editor or a cover designer or whatever it happens to be, I don't think that having a lower income should hold you back from your dream of being an author, right? And yeah, I definitely plan on getting an editor down the line. For my most recent book, I did have beta readers for it, which was really useful to sort of get their feedback. But up until this point, it's been really about me getting my ideas into the book and launching it, very much in that sort of sense. Part of this as well is about the importance of learning how to really trust myself as an author, right? So making sure that I'm really writing these stories and these characters that I want to write. And I was concerned early on that if I had a lot of different people along the way giving me feedback throughout the writing process, that I might sort of start to have doubts about, should I do this versus that? Whereas at this point in my author career, I'm, really comfortable and confident about receiving that kind of feedback during the process because I do trust myself and I can receive that process and funnel it through the book, right? And leave out the parts that aren't actually as sort of relevant and really take what everyone's saying with, okay, yes, that's a great point that I hadn't thought about before.
And I guess something that we hear from authors a lot as well is that, inevitably your writing will get better the more that you do it. So you can't expect your first book to be the one that's the best in the world. It's going to take off, you're 10 books in, you'll find your groove. Or I'm not saying that your first book will be bad or anything, but just we hear this all the time from like prolific writers that they're constantly getting better and constantly improving.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I definitely found for myself when I'm working on my books, I always like the most recent book the best, right? I always think it's the best one. And I've definitely had readers who have been reading my books right from the start. And they've said the same thing. They're like, yeah, your writing is improving with every book. Your storytelling is improving with every book. And this is also one of the reasons why it can be kind of nice to get that first book out there a little bit faster because you don't have that pressure, right? You haven't been working on this book for 10 years and then you put it out there and someone says, I wasn't a fan, right? And then you're crushed because you just, right, did all of that. It's really lovely to receive wonderful feedback, really positive reviews for my first book when I did write it and publish it within a space of 6 weeks, knowing that it wasn't going to be the most incredible book anyone has read, but also knowing that it's good, right? That it has it's a solid start to the series. So it puts less pressure on things when you can get your first book out there and then start to keep that momentum going.
Can kind of prove that you can actually do it. Like, I feel like a major roadblock is like, can I actually finish a book? And then you can, and then you just go from there.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it really does help with that momentum, right? And I find it's really exciting to know that every single book is going to be better, right? Like naturally, we can't help but improve our writing style, right? And our storytelling abilities are probably also going to improve and that kind of thing. And it's really cool to get positive feedback from readers and to be able to look at our books and go, I like this book, right? Like I can read this book and I enjoy this, even though I wrote it, and like I can come back to it and I like it. I think that when we can get to that point of realizing that I enjoy this book, other people are enjoying this book, and this is not my best work because the next one's going to be better. And the next one after that's going to be better. That's really exciting to think about how much better we can continue to be by book 20, right? That's really, really exciting. And I think that there's something so liberating about that when we really look at it from that perspective. When we think, okay, first book doesn't need to be this, the be all end all book that everyone's going to be talking about for decades to come as like this literary masterpiece. It's something that people are just going to enjoy, right? And the next book is going to be better. And the next book after that's going to be better. And like all of it just builds on that.
And I guess as well, something to keep in mind when you're writing kind of romance or serialized romance is that the more books you have, the easier it is to market your books. Once you get the reader in, they can kind of keep wanting to read. So it's easier to market when you have many, many books to sell.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, especially when the stories do all connect together, right? People get invested in the characters. They want to find out where the story's going next.
So just switching gears a little bit, you mentioned that you had a podcast, the Indie Author Weekly. So do you have any tips for authors interested in starting their own podcast, or kind of if a podcast is right for you? Because I feel like everyone's done like, just start a podcast. Anyone can do it.
Yeah. So once again, I'm going to say, make your own rules when it comes to starting a podcast. And, really, when I launched my podcast, it was kind of funny because it started out as my author newsletter every week. So I was sharing about my process and my journey of writing and publishing books as an indie author. The problem was that my emails were getting really, really long. And I was like, this is getting ridiculous. So then I started doing them as these audio recordings. So it was this kind of like a secret podcast where people could sign up and they would get this like 10-minute audio recording of me speaking rather than them having to read, pages and pages of a newsletter every week. And then from there, I actually had one of my friends who was like, this is really good. Like, I think you should like turn it into a podcast. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that because like the tech side of things, like that's just not my forte. And then I was looking at it and I was like, wait, why do I think that a podcast needs to be this super fancy, polished thing where I do like a whole bunch of edits to it and everything like that? So my podcast, Indie Author Weekly, is very much like a bare bones sort of podcast. I don't have intro music or anything like that. I record the entire episode in one sitting. It's like the intro, the body, and the outro, because that's what feels really good and easy for me. And listeners enjoy it, that it's something a little bit different than maybe what the norm sort of is with podcasts. And I really think that that's a big piece of looking at how can I make this easy and fun for me so that I can actually stick with it, right? If you want to create your own podcast, are you going to be, one of those podcasters who only does it for like 20 episodes and then falls off? I think it's 20 episodes is kind of that point where a lot of people stop doing it after that. And if you want to do it that way, that's great too. But how can you set yourself up to record these episodes for months and years to come, right? What's going to make it fun? What's going to make it easy for you? And also, what do you want your podcast to be, right? What is your sort of goal with it? Again, it comes back to like the strategy side of things, right? What do you want from it? And how can you make it something that you can continue to come up with ideas for on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or however often you do it? All of that kind of thing. Yeah.
I love the idea of a podcast author newsletter, and I'm surprised more people don't do it that way.
Yeah, it was fun. I really enjoyed it. And I mean, that was a big part of why I realized that why not turn it into an actual podcast, because I was having so much fun with it. I was like, I can keep doing this. I can keep just speaking into my microphone about the book that I'm working on that week, or a bit about the writing process, or tips for self-editing, right? All of these different types of things. It's really fun to share about the entire journey of it.
And you also have good transcripts, which we noticed. podcast and just want to shout out to anyone who's interested. You can read transcripts as well.
Yeah, I was going to mention that we've been kind of making a conscious effort to add transcripts and be as accessible as possible. And is that kind of a reason why you did that? And I guess I also wanted to ask you about what can people do to be more inclusive with their author marketing in general? So I think transcripts and accessibility and being aware is definitely a first step. But yeah, what would be your advice?
Yeah. I don't think of myself like I'm not an expert or anything like that when it comes to inclusivity. It's just something that I care a lot about and I think is really, really important. And so the transcript side of things was, very, very important because up until now, my I think I have 102 episodes right now. The vast majority of my episodes are all solo episodes. So it makes it a little bit easier for me to write those transcripts by doing them ahead of time and then recording the episode based on the transcript, right? And oftentimes I'll add in bits and pieces while I'm talking. But that really helps to make it easier to already have a transcript ready. Also doing, anytime that we're doing live videos, to make sure that it's always captioned, to include those alt descriptions for any images that we're posting. It's really easy to add those types of things in for, on Twitter and Instagram and all that kind of thing. So really thinking about, I think as much as possible, thinking about who are my readers, what can make things easier for them, right? What will make it more accessible for different people coming at this, at my books or what I'm trying to post on social media? What will make it more accessible for any kind of person, right? That's definitely really important. Yeah.
Nice. I am going to steal Stephanie's favorite question and ask you, what have you been loving lately? It could be a book, a movie, a podcast, a hobby, anything.
Oh, so many things. I have been loving Do Better. It's a book by Rachel Ricketts. It's a really fantastic book that just came out in the past month, and it's all about how to be actively anti-racist and inclusive. So it's a really wonderful, wonderful book that I would highly recommend everyone to read. So that's what I've been reading lately. What are some other things? I've been loving skiing. I'm skiing. I can't do it anymore. Everything's kind of melted and that kind of thing. So the snow has definitely melted a bit, but kayaking season will start up soon. So that's okay. So that's kind of what I've been doing in my spare time. And the Hello 7 podcast has been a really good one that I've been enjoying a lot, as well as the Membership Guys podcast. Those are two podcasts that I've been enjoying. Yeah, they're both really good if you are looking to grow your business and sort of expand things in that way.
Perfect. And then our final question, where can readers expect from you next and where can they find you online?
Yeah, so I'm currently, I've got my next rom-com is Small Town Stilettos, A Modern Marriage of Convenience. So that's going to be coming out in summer 2021. And so that's already on Goodreads. You can add it to your want to read list there, and it will be on Kobo very soon. You can check out my Polyamorous Passions series as well. It's available in all major ebook stores, or you can visit saganmorrow.com/books. And if you are trying to find more time to actually be able to write your own books, I have a free time-saving tips cheat sheet. So it features a bunch of different ideas for how you can save a lot of time and really be able to, save 10 hours or more every single week. So you can grab that at saganmorrow.com/save time.
I'm writing that down for myself. Just gonna make the most of that. Get an extra 10 hours a week.
It's a very, very handy resource. And you can always hang out with me on Twitter and Instagram. I spend a lot of time there at Sagan Lives.
Great. Thank you so much. I've learned so much today.
We're going to be so good at our jobs now, Steph.
Will we?
Of course.
When I work at 2 a.m. I found my time.
Yeah, thank you, Sagan. I think this was great. We covered so much, and we'll have the links for everything so authors can easily find you and find those free tips that you talked about.
Cool. Lovely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo ReWriting Life podcast. If you're interested in Sagan's courses, we'll include links in our show notes. If you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're looking for more tips on growing your self-publishing business, you can find us at kobowritinglife.com. Be sure to follow us on socials. We're at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook and X, and kobo.writing.life on Instagram and Threads. This episode was hosted by Tara Kremen and Stephanie McGrath, with production from Terrence Abrahams. Editing is provided by Kelly Robotham. Our theme music is composed by Tearjerker, and thanks to Sagan for being a guest. If you're ready to start your publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing!